What's going on, guys? Evan Preco here, and you are watching the SG1 Sports Big Ten Football Channel. In this video, we're going to be doing the recaps of all the Big Ten games that took place on Saturday for Week 4. And to start things off, we've got number 11 Michigan at number 13 Wisconsin. This is a game that got a lot of hype during the week. And for Michigan stats, Shea Patterson was 14 of 32 for 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Dylan McCaffrey was their leading rusher. He had 3 carries for only 21 yards, averaging 7 yards a carry, no touchdowns. And Ronnie Bell was their leading receiver. He had 2 receptions for 81 yards, averaging 40.5 yards per catch, no touchdowns. As a team, Michigan only had 40 total rushing yards, and they had only 299 total yards of offense. For Wisconsin, Jack Cohn went 13 of 16 for 128 yards, no touchdown, no interceptions. He also had 2 rushing touchdowns on the day, though. Jonathan Taylor was their leading rusher. He had 23 carries for 203 yards, averaging almost 9 yards a carry and 2 touchdowns. Garrett Groshek had 2 receptions for 38 yards, averaging 19 yards a catch, no touchdowns. He was their leading receiver. As a team, Wisconsin ran the ball for 359 total yards, and they had 487 total yards of offense. The final score of this game, Wisconsin dominated. They beat Michigan 35-14. And my thoughts, this is a huge win for Wisconsin and a huge blow for Michigan. I remember in previous videos I had talked about this game coming up, and I said I'd be surprised if either team won. I thought it was going to be a great game, and it was not for Michigan at all. I mean, final score 35-14. It was nowhere near as close as that score indicates because Wisconsin just came out right away. They took a 35-0 lead in the third quarter, and I mean they were up 28-0 at the half. So Michigan scored a couple garbage touchdowns, and Shea Patterson did not play as well as his stats indicate. I mean, he had 219 yards, but a lot of those came off of big plays or big completions that came toward the end of the game. And the 2 touchdown passes, one came late in the third quarter and the other came with about 5 minutes left in the fourth. So they're just garbage touchdowns. Now Wisconsin handled Michigan. They blew them out. That defense played super, super well. They forced turnovers. I think they forced 3 or 4 interceptions and a fumble. And Shea Patterson just could not get the rhythm going. And it's interesting we talk about Michigan's offense struggling because this is why they brought in a new offensive coordinator for this year. They were hoping that this new spread offense that other teams like LSU had been starting to do, but LSU's is working. Michigan's is not. Their offense wasn't great last year, so they brought in the new guy from Alabama, and it just hasn't worked. And this is a stressful time, in my opinion, for Jim Harbaugh because, I mean, in order to compete for a Big Ten championship at this point, I think you have to win out, including beating Ohio State, because Ohio State is dominating right now. This is a huge loss for Michigan, and if Jim Harbaugh wasn't on the hot seat already, which is debatable if he is or isn't, he definitely is on it now. So they have to win out. They get Rutgers next week, so that should be an easy win for them. Wisconsin gets Northwestern, so they will have pretty easy games next week. But Michigan has a ton of stuff they need to fix. That defense didn't play well either. Gave up a ton of rushing yards. They gave up a long touchdown run by Jonathan Taylor, and then Jack Cohen. He didn't throw the ball too much, only 128 yards, but he ran the ball pretty well. He had like a 30-yard touchdown run when he scrambled out of the pocket. So yeah, big win for Wisconsin. I very much look forward to seeing what they're going to do this year. I think that they are back. I think that Wisconsin is back to the top 10, playing like a top 10 team type of ways that they had done in the past couple years before last year. So yeah, that defense is playing great so far, and the offense is playing great as well, especially against a good defense like Michigan's. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to how this team will perform throughout the rest of the season, and I think that they should be competing for a Big Ten West championship because right now they're the most impressive team in the Big Ten West for me right now. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that game. Great win for Wisconsin, bad loss for Michigan. We'll see how both teams continue to perform in the future. Next up, we've got UConn at Indiana. And for Indiana stats, Peyton Ramsey went 23 of 27 for 247 yards, threw 3 touchdown passes, and only 1 interception. Stevie Scott III was their leading rusher. He had 21 carries for 97 yards, averaging 4.5 yards per carry and 1 touchdown. And Wap Fillier was their leading receiver. He had 4 receptions for 47 yards, averaging almost 12 yards a reception and a touchdown. And Ty Freifogel was also tied for their leading receiver. He had 5 receptions for also 47 yards, averaging 9.5 yards per reception, no touchdowns. As a team, Indiana only ran the ball for about 178 total yards, but they did have 430 total yards of offense. For UConn, Zach Zergiotis was the starting quarterback. He went 14 of 28 for only 90 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. Kevin Mensah was their leading rusher. He had 10 carries for 34 yards, averaging 3.4 yards a carry, no touchdowns. And Cameron Ross was their leading receiver. He had 3 receptions for 30 yards, averaging 10 yards a catch and no touchdowns. They only had 51 total rushing yards and only 145 total yards of offense. The final score of this one, Indiana handled business. They won 38-3. I'm not surprised. I think Indiana is a decently good football team. They've won their games pretty well, and they've looked good, except for the Ohio State game. But then at the same time, Ohio State is blowing out everybody they play. So that was basically to be expected. But yeah, Indiana is 3-1 heading into main conference play. And I think that they've got a lot to look forward to. Next week, they play Michigan State, and Michigan State just had a good win against Northwestern that I'll get to here in a little bit. But yeah, no, Indiana is a team that can definitely play football with other conference foes, and I think that they will have a good year. Obviously, their main goal this year, and I've said this before, is to make a bowl game, because that's something that they just fell just short on the past couple years. So I think that if they keep playing the way they're playing now, they can definitely earn that. Offensively, they're getting better and better. They just put up 38 against UConn. Peyton Ramsey played pretty well. And we'll see what happens when they get Penix Jr. back. I think he's still hurt. But yeah, no, good win for Indiana. I look forward to seeing how they continue to play. Now we've got Michigan State at Northwestern. For Michigan State, Brian Lewerke went 18 of 31 for 228 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Elijah Collins was their leading rusher. He had 17 carries for 76 yards, averaging 4.5 yards per carry and a touchdown run. And Darrell Stewart Jr. had 5 receptions for 77 yards. He was their leading receiver, averaging 15.5 yards per catch, no touchdowns. They had only 109 total rushing yards, but they did have 337 total yards of offense. For Northwestern, Hunter Johnson went 15 of 26 for only 88 yards, no touchdowns, and 1 interception. Drake Anderson was their leading rusher. He had 17 carries for 91 yards, averaging over 5 yards a carry, almost 5.5, and 1 touchdown toward the end of the game. And then Bennett Skowronek had 3 receptions for 31 yards, averaging over 10 yards a reception. No touchdowns. And then they had 139 total rushing yards as a team and 265 total yards of offense. This game wasn't really ever close. The final score, Michigan State 31, Northwestern 10. And a good bounce-back win for Michigan State after dropping their game to Arizona State last weekend. This is a good bounce-back win for them. Good road win in conference play. It's always a good thing to have your head up about, no matter who you're playing. As long as it's a conference opponent and it's on the road, those are always good games to steal away. And yeah, I mean, not only did Michigan State play well, but they dominated. And Northwestern historically has a good defense. They're pretty young this year, but Michigan State put up 31 points on them. And Michigan State's defense played dominant. I get Hunter Johnson's a young quarterback, but he struggled, and he ended up getting benched in the second half. So Michigan State's defense obviously played very well, and Northwestern struggled, and it looked like that they were going to at the beginning of the year. They do this every year. They struggle in September, but I'm not so sure that this is going to be one of those years where as soon as October hits, they're going to start winning games at a consistent level. I don't believe that's going to happen because they are very young, very inexperienced. They did lose a lot from last year, and even last year when they were losing early games, none of them were ever blowouts. They were close losses, and this is a blowout. And that's not the way you want to open up conference play. So they definitely have a lot of stuff to work on. Pat Fitzgerald isn't going to tolerate this type of play, though, so it'll be interesting to see how they respond to this type of game. They play Wisconsin next week. Michigan State, They play Indiana, so that'll be actually a pretty good game since I just talked about Indiana. That could be a pretty close game. And yeah, we'll see what happens. I think this is a good win for Michigan State. I'm still kind of confused what to think about them offensively because there are games this year that they've looked good on offense, and then of course there were games like last week where they did not look good on offense at all. So it is interesting to talk about Michigan State because they're not doing something at a consistent level. It's like they're almost two different teams depending on the type of game they play. The only thing that they are doing consistently is good defense, and as long as they keep doing that, I think that they can win a lot of games or at least stay close in most of their games. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, good win for Michigan State to bounce back from that loss. Northwestern obviously is struggling. They have some stuff that they need to work on, but it'll be interesting to see how they respond to this loss and how they play once October comes. Next up, we've got Boston College at Rutgers. And for Boston College, Anthony Brown was the starting quarterback. He went 13 of 25 for 159 yards, no touchdowns, but no picks. A.J. Dillon was their leading rusher. He had 32 carries for 150 yards, averaging 4.7 yards a carry and 2 touchdowns. Hunter Long was their leading receiver. He had 3 receptions for only 38 yards, averaging 12.7 yards a catch, no touchdowns. They had 272 total rushing yards and 431 total yards of offense. For Rutgers, Arthur Sitkowski was the starting quarterback. He went 23 of 33 for 304 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 pick. Isaiah Pacheco was their leading rusher. He had 17 carries for 47 yards, averaging only 2.8 yards a carry, no touchdowns. And Raheem Blackshear was their leading receiver. He had 9 receptions for 130 yards, averaging 14.5 yards per catch and a touchdown. They only had 76 total rushing yards, but they did have 380 total yards of offense. Boston College won this game 30-16, and I can't say that I'm surprised. You know, Rutgers is one of the bottom teams in not only the Big Ten, but in all of the FBS or Power 5 FBS teams. I thought that they might have a good shot at winning this game, especially because last week Boston College lost to Kansas. So I thought, hey, it's at Rutgers, maybe they'll have a chance. And throughout the game, Rutgers played pretty well. They held with them, and there were a couple times where they took the lead, and it was a close game in the first half. And then Boston, they just didn't adjust well. Rutgers did not adjust well at halftime, and Boston College ended up, pulling away in the second half, and they won by 14 points. There's not a lot to talk about this game. I can't say that I was surprised that Rutgers lost, considering how they struggle on a consistent basis. But we'll see how they do. They are going to play Michigan next week, and I don't expect that to be a close game at all. I think that they're going to continue to struggle in conference play. I don't know if that's news really to anyone here, but that's just how it is. So this is going to be kind of a short recap on this game, but if Rutgers can, play the way that they played in the first half, then, they could beat a Boston College team that isn't great, but isn't horrible at the same time. So they just have to, make the plays on a consistent basis. And they did that in the first half, but didn't in the second half. And that ended up costing them the game. And, that's all I really have to say about that one. So, yeah, obviously Rutgers needs to work on stuff. And we'll see how they do throughout the rest of the year. All right, now we've got Miami of Ohio at number 6, Ohio State. And for Ohio State, Justin Fields went off again. He went 14 of 21 for 223 passing yards and 4 touchdown passes, no interceptions. Rushing-wise, he had 9 carries for 36 yards, averaging 4 yards a carry, and 2 touchdown runs. Steel Chambers was the leading rusher. He had 8 carries for 63 yards, averaging 7.9 yards a carry, and 1 touchdown. KJ Hill was the leading receiver. He only had 2 receptions for 78 yards, but he was averaging 39 yards of reception, and he had a touchdown. They had 227 total rushing yards and 601 total yards of offense. For Miami of Ohio, Brett Gabbert was the starting quarterback. He went 5 for 15 for only 48 yards, no touchdowns, and a pick. Maurice Thomas was their leading rusher. He had 8 carries for 44 yards, averaging 5.5 yards a carry, no touchdowns. Jack Sorensen was their leading receiver. He had 4 receptions for 42 yards, averaging 10.5 yards a catch and no touchdowns. They only had 70 total rushing yards, and they only had 130 total yards of offense. The final score of this game, a blowout. Ohio State 76, Miami of Ohio 5. And I mean, this was to be expected. Ohio State again dominating another team. Um, the only thing I have to say that could be problematic for their offense is that they started off a little bit slow on their first possession. They ended up giving up a safety. So Miami, Ohio actually started off with the lead. They took a 5-0 lead before Ohio State scored any points, but then Ohio State scored 76 straight points. So as soon as they scored, they got going and they didn't even look back in the other direction once. So yeah, big win for Ohio State. Next week they are playing at Nebraska, and a lot of people are thinking this could be a possible upset. I'm not so sure about that because we'll get to Nebraska's game here in a minute, but I think that Ohio State, just the way they're playing, the way they're dominating teams, I just don't see them letting up at all. They are playing much better than I think any of us thought they would. We thought because when Urban Meyer left, they would drop a little bit, in production on the field, and they have done the exact opposite. They have gotten better under Ryan Day so far. But, I mean, the only Big Ten team that they've played so far is Indiana. So we'll see how they do against better conference opponents. But, yeah, good win for Ohio State. This is what they were expected to do. I mean, even the backups played well, and good win for them. Last up, we've got Nebraska at Illinois. And for Nebraska, Adrian Martinez went 22 of 34 for 327 yards, 3 touchdown passes, no interceptions. Rushing-wise, he was their leading rusher. He had 18 carries for 118 yards, averaging 6.6 yards a carry, no touchdowns. J.D. Spielman was their leading receiver. He had 7 receptions for 159 yards, averaging 22.7 yards to catch, no touchdowns. And Wan'Dale Robinson, the true freshman from Kentucky, went off. He had 168 total yards and 3 total touchdowns. As a team, Nebraska had 344 total rushing yards, and they had 671 total yards of offense, the most that they've had under Scott Frost thus far. For Illinois, Brandon Peters went 9 for 22 for 78 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Richie Corbin had a great game. He had 20 carries for 134 yards, averaging 6.7 yards a carry, and a touchdown run at the beginning of the game. Ricky Smalling was their leading receiver. He had 5 receptions for 41 yards, averaging 8.2 yards to catch, no touchdowns. They had 221 total rushing yards, but only 299 total yards of offense. The final score, Nebraska survived 42-38, and this was a great game to watch, in my opinion. I mean, stat-wise, between the two teams, it sounds like Nebraska killed them. I mean, they had almost 400 more yards of total offense than Illinois did. But, I mean, they only won by 4 points, and that's because Nebraska's main problem is ball handling. They fumbled the ball 4 times yesterday. One of them was somewhat controversial, but they had 4 fumbles, and each fumble gave Illinois the ball in great territory, and they capitalized on all of them. So that's how they were able to score that many points. They just forced the turnovers and capitalized. But other than that, I mean, Nebraska's defense didn't play bad. Obviously, they gave up a huge touchdown run at the beginning of the game, but in the second half, they played pretty well. They made the stops when they needed to. They forced an interception, and Nebraska's offensively was moving the ball well when they didn't fumble. Adrian Martinez struggled at first because he wasn't throwing the ball that well, and he made some wrong reads. But once he got it going, they were moving the ball great. Obviously, it shows because they had almost 700 yards of offense. So, yeah, kind of a scare for Nebraska, and they play Ohio State next week. So, obviously, they have a lot of stuff they have to work on. They cannot, if they want to play with Ohio State next week, they cannot fumble the ball like they did on Saturday against Illinois, or else they will get blown out. But yeah, I think it also says a lot about this Nebraska team, considering everything that went bad during the first half of the game. I mean, there were 3 different times where they were down by 14 points, and for them to kind of keep playing, not panic, and keep making plays, and they come out with the win, it shows a lot about their character. And their team identity under Scott Frost, and they continue to fight, and that's a good thing to see in a football team, but they really, really need to clean up the mistakes because that is something that you don't want to see them make against a team like Illinois, who's been kind of at the bottom of the Big Ten for the past few years. And offensively, Illinois played great. I mean, they when they were given the ball in short field, they took advantage and they made the plays. Defensively, there were times where they looked good and there were times where they looked bad. The good times was when they forced the fumbles, and the bad was when they didn't, when they were giving up a ton of plays, a ton of touchdowns, a ton of yards. And I mean, I just think, the key point of this game was how Wan'Dale Robinson impacted it. I mean, he had a touchdown run and 2 touchdown catches, and he just went off. And without him, I don't think that Nebraska would have been able to win this game, especially because Maurice Washington got hurt early. J.D. Spielman kind of carried the team on his back a little bit at times because he kept making the tough catches and he kept getting popped hard. But yeah, no, it's a good win for Nebraska. Not as close as people thought it would. Excuse me, closer than people thought it would be. I don't think anyone saw this to be as close as it was, and Illinois could have very easily won this game if they had continued to build on their momentum. But Nebraska fought and they came back, so a big win for them. They play Ohio State next week, and they will be tested. So we will see how that goes. And that's all the games that happened this weekend for the Big Ten. This will be a shorter video because quite a few teams were on byes this weekend. But yeah, it was a good weekend of football for the Big Ten, and I look forward to talking to you guys next weekend about what happens during Week 5. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section about all of the games, about all of the teams, about what they have coming up and how you think they're going to do during the season. I would definitely enjoy reading your comments, and also please leave a like on this video and subscribe to our channel. Subscribe to our main SG1 Sports channel as well. I thank you all so much for watching, and have a great day, everybody.